Hey everyone, it's Andrew Klavan with this week's interview with Alessandra Conti. Alessandra is a matchmaker, and we've been getting so many letters, countless letters from people who are having trouble finding their mate, who are having trouble dating, who find dating just to be a nightmare. Alessandra is the founding partner of Matchmakers in the City, an old school personal matchmaking firm based in Beverly Hills. She is the celebrity matchmaker for shows like Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, Access Hollywood, Face the Truth, and was a matchmaker behind 2 seasons of MTV's Are You the One? She's been featured in Forbes, Fox News, New York Times, but who cares? Now she's on the Daily Wire, so she's really made it. And Alessandra,
I made it.
You are the person we have been waiting for. We have been having this conversation, and I've been married for 100 years, so I really am not in the game, and I wanted to bring on somebody who could talk about this because look, the people who are listening to the show are not celebrities. Some of them are professional, some of them aren't, but young people especially, are having a hard time finding one another. And I want to know, you're a matchmaker. That's really interesting. You're not running a dating service. You actually do matchmaking. So what do you know? What is happening that is making this so hard?
Absolutely. I think that I feel like it should be my bumper sticker at this point, but I always say men who are great at dating are typically not great at relationships.
Okay, that's interesting. All right.
Yes. And I say this over and over. I tell all of the clients that we're working with that, ladies, you need to give the good guys a chance because they're self-sabotaging immediately when they meet a nice guy who's maybe not great at the first early stages of courtship or presentation on a dating app. So they're then self-sabotaging and selecting these, very well polished and very charismatic men who are then not great at relationships and are not really looking for something serious. So I think, obviously there's so many different issues, but I think broadly we can begin there.
Yeah, let's start with that for just a minute, just so I understand it. That I can understand why a good guy might be bad at dating. You're nervous, you're shy, whatever, you don't know what to say. But why are the guys, is it necessarily true that if a guy comes in and he's a great first date, that should be a red flag? Should you really look at that as a red flag?
I don't necessarily think it's a waving red flag,
okay.
But I think it's more giving the men that are just not good. So I hear so many times in date feedback meetings with the clients that we're working with. So we have a team of 7 matchmakers at our firm. So we're constantly doing pre-date coaching and post-date coaching. So everybody's getting pre-date coaching and then they're getting these post-date coaching sessions, which is where we really get the juice. And I've been doing this for 12 years. So I have heard thousands and thousands of post-date coaching sessions and date feedback. And what we're hearing from the women is that we're hearing words like, he seemed like a narcissist because all he did was talk about himself. And we're hearing, these really judgmental calls that are just not the right calls, where it could just be that, hey, the guy was super nervous. He thought you were a beautiful woman. So of course he's going to want to, talk about all of his accolades and he's really excited. And he then didn't ask a question until, midway through the date. So yeah,
okay,
it's not.
Yep.
Yeah. And the thing is, the big things that men and women should be looking for when they're dating, and especially if they're using dating apps and meeting men in real life, the 3 big keys: do they want to get married? Do they want to have children? And is religion compatible? And if those elements are not aligned, it doesn't matter. It's not going to work.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You would say, of course. Of course, these are givens, but we just see so many people that are trying to make somebody into, the partner that they want them to be. So yes, all that to say, if they want marriage, want kids, and religious compatibility, unless a woman is repulsed by a man, we tell these women, give him a second date. Give him a second date. Especially, of course, he's been, we do background checks, social media checks, and sex offender searches, as one should do.
Should anybody do that? Should anybody do that? I mean, you're obviously working a very high-end, business, but can an ordinary person do that too?
If you are using the dating apps and you are not background checking the men and women that you're meeting, I bless you. You need to be background checking. There's an amazing website, binverified.com. It's, I don't know, like $60. I don't even know. I really don't know. I think it's either $60 a month or $60 for the year. You put that person's cell phone number in there and you'll get the basics, right? I mean, if they've had something expunged from their record and they're using some weird name, it's not going to pop up. But in this modern world, you need to be incredibly careful about who you're meeting if you're using online dating. However, meeting people in person is also, what an amazing way, right? And I know that there was a graph recently that went viral, and it was this graph about how things have changed so incredibly in the last even 10 years. And it was like, people used to meet through, through friends of friends, through family, right, through church, through temple, through whatever. And those graphs were really big. And then you see online dating was really, really small. And then it grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. So now online dating is it's huge. It's huge. So now I have a bunch of questions just off what you said. First, let's go back to you said you had a pre-date coaching. So one of the things I hear from a lot of women, I hear this a lot, is guys don't know what to do. They don't take charge. They don't pick the place. They don't make conversation. I come in and you have matched me up with somebody and I'm ready to go out on a date. What are you telling me to do? What's Absolutely. So yes. Well, for our clients, it is a little different because we have like a concierge date planner that does everything for them. Okay. But so I'll kind of put that a little bit aside. But if you were a man that was coming and being like, listen, I'm meeting this really great girl. I have this, there's a date on the calendar. However, what do I do now? It's all of the things that you just mentioned. If a man says, great, I would love to bring you to dinner. It will be at 7 p.m. And if the guy is like, oh, I don't know what kind of food she likes, give her an option. The worst thing a guy can do is say, I don't know, where do you want to go? And Andrew, this happens so frequently. These guys, and they're well-meaning. They don't mean any harm. They want the woman to be happy. So they say, oh, no, this will make her feel good because she's making the selection. It's her choice, all about choice lately. So they say, oh, whatever she wants to do. No. Tell her, hey, I picked this Italian place. You can't go wrong with Italian, right. Or I picked whatever it is. I picked this amazing Mexican place. It has the best, it has the best guacamole that I've tasted in the city. 7 p.m. I know it's our first time meeting. Would you, I want to be a gentleman and offer to pick you up. However, I totally get it if you just want to meet me there. And some guys that go, we're in LA, so the guys really feel like they have to raise the bar with these women. They say, hey, do you want me to send you an Uber? And that, when that happens, the ladies go wild.
They love that.
Women love it. If you're like, oh, let me send you an Uber if you would like. And it's what, $20? Yeah. But you then set yourself so much apart because again, a lot of the issues with the dating apps. I'm sorry, I'm monologuing, Andrew. I would.
No, that's right. I'm really interested because, but then, okay, so then the guy shows up. That's really good advice for setting the date up. Now the guy shows up and girls keep telling me that the guys don't know how to talk. They don't know how to make conversation. They look at their phones, which seems to be an obvious, stupid thing to do. But like, do you coach them on that? Do you coach people on that? Again, you're dealing with a high-end people, but if you weren't, what would you say?
Yeah, and we work with normal professionals as well. I mean, date coaching it's not expensive. I mean, well, objective is kind of, I guess, subjective, but anyone can use a date coach. And I really encourage young men that if a man is really struggling with this, hire somebody. I mean, if it's not us, just look up, dating coaches near me and make sure, obviously, that your values align and you're not going to go with a coach that is just completely going to coach you in a strange way that's maybe not as traditional. Right. So you do have to be careful about what avenue you're going down. But yeah, I mean, I think for men, an easy rule of thumb is to think of the gentleman's code, right? So just think of it as, I am the leader of this date. I am the leader of the date. And we always tell women 3 words: let him lead. Let him lead. Let him lead. Just allow it, because a lot of men will lead, but they need the space and they need that beat, because women are just so quick to, they'll open the door for themselves. They'll be like, oh, well, look at the menu and say, oh, well, I want, da 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 da. Take a second. Let the man lead. And men know. I mean, if men have been in society for a couple years, if they've seen a romantic comedy, they know the basics of, and even if you haven't studied the gentleman's code or all of this. But as the man, though, think of yourself, I am leading this date. Like, I am in control of this date. What are my goals? I want to set my goals. I want the woman to feel really safe. I want her to feel, safe in the date. I want her to feel like, great, get there early. Men, get to the date early, especially on a first date. You want to be ready. You want to kind of claim the area, know what you're working with, familiarize yourself with the surroundings. And we even tell some of the men that have a little more social anxiety, go beforehand. Just be familiar with the setting, because then that will also really alleviate a lot of nerves. And then when they're on the date, make sure you're anticipating needs. So it's anticipating the woman's needs. A lot of women are like, oh my gosh, yeah, we didn't order. He was talking for, 45 minutes and didn't even ask me if I was thirsty. And you're like, oh, just give the guy give him a bone. So then we say, it's okay. Let him lead. Take a pause. Let him lead. But men, this is good. Now that you're listening, now you know, because you listened to the Andrew Klavan Show and you've learned.
Yeah, there you go. And what about conversation? Are there rules for conversation, or you just go where you want to go?
There are general guidelines, and I heard this horrific advice. I was at a matchmaking conference. Yes, they exist. They are in Cancun. We do have them. There's a lot of play, also a lot of work as well. But I heard this just horrific advice to, and I really love this matchmaker, so I won't throw anyone under the bus, but they were like, ask, you want to get into a deep, connective soul conversation. And you want to ask them, hey, I heard you talking about your ex. Are you over them? And no, do not talk about former relationships on a date. Save ex talk for another day. This is not a therapy session. The goal of the date is to enjoy yourself, have a few topics, and especially for the men, maybe men who are, it takes them a beat, right? It takes them a beat to get comfortable. So have a few topics in your mind of things that you actually enjoy talking about. Because if you are faking, if you're like, oh, I'm trying to relate to her. Oh, let's talk about Spice Girls. And you don't know anything about the Spice Girls, or, oh, let me talk about Taylor Swift. Oh my gosh, just don't save it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Just have topics that you are actually passionate about. It could be travel. It could be travel. So have that in your back pocket if you sense that there's more than like a pregnant pause. But for the men, a great rule of thumb when they first get into the date, make sure that, if you guys are texting, say, oh, hey, like, did you find the place okay? Awesome. I'm already at the table. Let me know when you're here. You can go up to the front and then bring her to the table so she's not led. These little micro healthy masculine moves are beautiful, and they build up. They build up. And then the woman is like, oh my gosh, he came to the door. How sweet. And then, he did the chair, and then the shush, he did that. He did the chair. How sweet of him. And now I'm seated, and you can say, hey, take a look at the menu. I think, I've been here before. I think we should definitely get the guac. I don't know what it is today. I'm all about the guac, but like get the guac and then say, oh, you know what? And also this drink is amazing. I think I'm going to order an old fashioned, whatever you want. And then say, so tell me about yourself. Tell me a little bit about yourself, and then women love talking. Look at this interview. We love it. We love it.
Yes. I noticed
Andrew.
that. Yeah.
Oh, bless.
Hey everyone, it's Andrew Klavan with this week's interview with Carl Trueman. He has a new book out. We've had Carl on before, but he's got a really terrific new book out called To Change All Worlds, Critical Theory from Marx to Marcuse. There's been a lot of histories. I've talked about this before. There's been a lot of histories about how we got here. Michael Knowles, I know it's hard to believe, but Michael Knowles actually wrote one. Christopher Rufo wrote a good one. Katie Gorka wrote one. What kind of philosophy brought us here? I think the best one is by Carl, actually, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. Beyond asking how we got here, I always wind up wondering, how do we get out of where we are and how do we move on? And To Change All Worlds sort of begins to discuss that. This is how we got to critical theory, of which I all know you know something about, but you're about to find out a lot more. Carl Trueman is doing spectacular work. I would even say it's unique. He is a teacher at Grove City College in Pennsylvania. He's a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, which I think is in D.C. And Carl, it's great to see you. It's always good to see you. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me on again, Andrew. It's always fun to see you and interact for a while.
Yeah, no, it's always good talking to you. I read this book and I was muttering compliments to you all through it, and it's just it's really interesting. One of the things I like about it so much is that it's not a political book. It's not a book that says these are the enemies and we're the good guys and we're going to take this on. It's a book that actually takes these theorists seriously, which sometimes can be the most damaging thing you can do to them. But it understands that they are addressing things that are real in the world. And I appreciate that. So maybe let's begin by explaining to people what critical theory is exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the term, of course, is bandied around a lot today, and it's more used than defined often. But I would go to, if I wanted to define critical theory, I would go to a statement of Karl Marx that Marx makes in some notes that weren't actually published during his lifetime, but were published afterwards. They're called the Theses on Feuerbach, and they're just a series of notes that he makes on an influential German philosopher, Ludwig Feuerbach. Yeah. And the 11th thesis, which is actually engraved on Marx's tomb in Highgate Cemetery in London, says something like this. It says, the philosophers have thus far only described the world. The point is to change it. And there you get the great distinction between what critical theorists would say is between what they call traditional theory and critical theory. And traditional theory is that the sort of the way we typically understand philosophy as describing the world, helping us to understand why the world is the way it is. It's a descriptive, analytic discipline. Critical theorists, though, they want to change the world. And what distinguishes a critical theory from a traditional theory is that critical theory is designed to revolutionize what's going on in society. And I could perhaps illustrate that for listeners. Say, when we think of the notion of truth, for example, most of us default at some point to what we would call, sort of referential theory of truth. The statement, the cat is on the mat, is true if the cat is actually on the mat, or it's false if the cat isn't on the mat. Critical theorists would say, no, that's a traditional notion of truth. Truth is actually that which moves history in a revolutionary direction. So you could tell a lie, but that would actually be true for a critical theorist if it destabilizes the status quo and moves things in a revolutionary direction. So take, for example, the 1619 project that was all the rage a few years ago. A lot of conservatives responded to that by pointing out, the many historical errors that were in the book. Well, a critical theorist would say, but actually that's irrelevant. Of course there are historical errors in the book. Why? Because the aim of the book is not to recapitulate true history. The aim of the book is to destabilize the American status quo, to destabilize the dominant American narrative in order to open the way for revolution. So critical theory isn't just social criticism. It's not just digging below the surface of why we do things. It's digging below the surface of why we do things in order to revolutionize the way we do things.
So the flaw to this, or when you say this, I have to stop my eyes from bleeding because it does sound insane. But the flaw that I immediately see in this is that even our ideas of what is good and what is wrong with the world come from the world. They come from our culture. They come from our traditions and history. It's kind of an Edmund Burke idea that these things are what we are. So is there part of critical theory where they say we know what the world should be because X?
Well, this is a very interesting question because the problem that critical theory faces is that it wants to push towards a utopia, a kind of, in terms of the Frankfurt School, a kind of Marxist socialist utopia. The problem is, of course, it's hard to articulate that from a dystopian perspective. Mm-hmm. So one of the interesting things about critical theorists is typically they're very clear on what they want to destroy or tear down, not so clear on what they want to build in its place. And a good recent example would be if you were to go to the Black Lives Matter website. I haven't checked it for a year or two, so it may have changed. But in its heyday, the Black Lives Matter website had a sort of vision statement. And it had a series of things that it wanted to get rid of. It wanted to get rid of the police. It wanted to get rid of the justice system, a whole heap of things that needed to be destroyed. When it moved into, well, what are you going to replace these things with? It became, I say to students, it became really rather poetic at that point. It started to use language like, of course we want to live in a village. And you say, well, yeah, but don't villages require police forces? You've got to put some flesh on this utopian skeleton that you are poetically pointing towards. So I think you're pointing towards one of the great weaknesses of critical theory, that I think the assumption of critical theorists tends to be, if we can tear everything that is down, utopia will naturally emerge from the ruins. That seems to be the idea, because they're not reformists. They don't want to reform the system. They want to destroy the system. But they don't have any real positive proposals with what to replace the system with, other than vague talk about socialist equality, villages, et cetera, et cetera.
So now, the thing, as I said at the beginning, the thing I really like about this book, To Change All Worlds, Critical Theory from Marx to Marcuse, it's Marcuse, right? There's an actual, pronounce that E. That you have a certain amount of acceptance of this theory. Not that you accept the truth of it, but that you understand where it's coming from. What the hell is wrong with you, Carl? No. No, what I really want is, I sympathize too, because you point to this feeling of alienation that these guys are addressing. Can you describe what that is, where that comes from, and why we should have sympathy for it?
I mean, on one level, the critical theorists are onto something. They realize that, industrial and post-industrial modernity has not delivered on its promise. And one might even say that, think about alienation. Marx, I think, makes, when Marx talks about alienation, he talks about different kinds of alienation, but they all track back to really how we make things. And again, we might express it in a way that's sort of fairly easy to grasp and say, if you think about somebody the blacksmith in the Middle Ages. He's making the shoe for the horse. He's softening the metal, he's hammering it, he's styling it. He's probably putting his own distinctive mark on it. And then later he's walking around the village and he sees one of his clients riding a horse through the village. And he takes some pride and thinks, that's only possible because of me. Only I could have made those shoes for that horse. If you jump forward to the 19th century and you have some guys working in a factory and he's pulling a lever that's stamping out horseshoes, he's never going to take pride. He's never going to pass a horse and say, I made that shoe. And Marx would say he's become alienated really from the means of production. He's become alienated from the things he produces. And that leads to this vacuum at the heart of modern life. And I think the critical theorists are onto something there. Most of us experience this world in a way that, consumerism does leave us with a hollow feeling.
Yeah.
We don't take the same satisfaction, perhaps, in our work. I'm privileged, as you are, Andrew, to have work that I really enjoy doing. But when I was a student, I worked in a factory for a summer on a production line. And years later, I drove past the factory and saw the women I worked with clocking out at clocking out time. And I suddenly realized, wow, I have a job now that gives me a sense of value. Would I have that same sense of value if I was just taping up a box on an industrial production line day after day after day? So the critical theorists are really pointing to something, that vacuum at the heart of modernity that so many of us feel, even if we can't fully articulate it. So, as I say sort of in the book on a number of occasions, the problem with critical theorists is not that they're asking the wrong question. They're often asking the right questions. The problem is they give the wrong answers.
Yeah. I know we've talked about this before, but I think it's worth going back over how this became so much a part of our world that we're actually talking about, they're actually arguing in front of the Supreme Court that it's unfair to treat boys and girls as if they were boys and girls, and that we're saying that you can just essentially change your sex by thought. How did we get that far? Can you just explain how that infiltrated our system?
Yeah, I mean, I can give a number of answers to that. One, I would say that when you start to believe that human beings, the essence of a human being is to be an autonomous individual, all forms of external authority start to feel oppressive. And when we think about the trans issue, one could make a case for saying, the body is the last barrier of external oppression. As much as I might want to self-identify as immortal, I have a feeling my body is going to impose its will upon me at some point, and I'm going to die. So we could certainly see the trans issue as arising out of that Western focus on autonomy. I would also say that, this is more from a Christian perspective. There's a certain, in fallen human beings, we like iconoclasm. We like to smash stuff up. When I teach Reformation at Grove, I sometimes make the point that one of the reasons the Reformation succeeds is it encourages young men to go around smashing stained glass windows. That's a winner with young guys. If you're a 20-year-old guy and you give the guy a brick and say, go and smash a window, there's nothing greater than smashing a window.
Yeah.
And we look at critical theory as a highly sophisticated form of smashing stuff. So I think there's something in human nature. We don't like external authority and we like smashing stuff up. And that's in some ways, it's more complicated than that. But I would say those two things play very much into the trans issue and into the popular reception of critical theory.
When I'm feeling lousy, as I'm sure you can hear it in my voice, I'm just feeling absolutely terrible. It's really, really hard to sleep. I don't sleep much as it is. I don't need that much sleep, but it is really tough to sleep. And that's why I want to talk to you about Beam's Dream Powder. This is a science-backed, healthy nighttime blend for sleep. When I found Dream, at least I knew I could fall asleep. That was the most important thing. It works. I started sleeping really well. It really put me down, and I appreciated that. Plus, I wake up refreshed and not groggy. I would never use any chemicals because I hate that feeling of being groggy. With better sleep, your energy and focus comes back. You feel like you can tackle your days instead of just getting through them. Other sleep aids can cause that grogginess. It's just awful. Dream contains a powerful all-natural blend. That's the big thing. It's all natural. It's reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin, all of which you can look them up. They help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. Now, as I start 2025, I'm determined to keep this going. I want to be able to fall asleep. Dream is something that I just love drinking at night. It's made a big difference. If you're like me and you struggle with sleep, there's no better way to start this year than with consistent, restful nights. Dream will help you feel your best every single day. The ultimate sleep refresh for the new year. Try Beam's best-selling Dream Powder. Get up to 40% off for a limited time when you go to shopbeam.com/Klavan and use code Klavan at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/Klavan. Use code Klavan for up to 40% off. And you're thinking, they tell me how to spell Beam, but they don't tell me how to spell Klavan. Here is how you do it.
K-L-A-V-A-N, there are no E's in Klavan.
Hey, it's Andrew Klavan with this week's interview with Dr. Leonard Sachs. I met Leonard a couple of years ago, I guess, at a conference and was absolutely fascinated with his ideas about parenting, especially about fatherhood, the way he looks at the problems that boys and girls are having. And I think at this moment, this has got to be one of the most important topics out there. I think the culture is shifting. I think and hope it is shifting for the good, but obviously it doesn't shift and it doesn't change if we don't change it in our homes where the future is created. Leonard Sachs is a board-certified family physician, psychologist. He's the author of The Collapse of Parenting, Why Gender Matters, Boys Adrift and Girls on the Edge. He's visited more than 500 schools worldwide. He's appeared on major radio and television programs, including The Today Show, CBS, CNN, Fox, and NPR's Weekend Edition. But now he has finally made it after climbing that scale to the Daily Wire. It's great to see you, Leonard. How are you doing?
Thanks for inviting me.
No, it's a real pleasure. So this is Collapse of Parenting is a book you brought out before, but it's a new edition. And you say that things have changed and that they've actually gotten worse in that time. So first of all, how long a period of time are we talking about? And can you just talk about some of those changes, how things have gotten worse?
Sure. So the first edition came out January 2016, and I'm proud to report it was a New York Times bestseller. But yeah, things have gotten a lot worse. So Trinity United Presbyterian Church hired me to do 2 days of workshops for parents recently, and I have a few fans, people who turned out for 12 hours of Leonard Sachs over 2 days. And you do that, you get to know some of these people. And I was talking with this young woman who's a teacher, and she and her husband have been trying to get pregnant for 3 years. And they finally succeeded, and she is pregnant, and she's very excited about that. And she was talking to one of her coworkers, a fellow teacher, didn't know real well, but she's very excited. She's telling everybody. And she said to her coworker, she said, "We just found out I'm having a boy." And her coworker said, "Don't you think you should let the baby decide?" So this is Orange County, that's Southern California, but this is a thing now. This is really spreading nationwide. It's not just Southern California, and that really was not a thing 9 years ago when I was writing the book, and it is a thing now. Not just in California, you'll find this in New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and really across a big chunk of the United States now, where so many parents now think good parenting means letting kids decide. Gentle parenting is really a thing now across pretty much half the United States. Gentle parenting means letting kids decide. Well, I mean, we can argue about the definitions. There's a lot of different definitions. I'm a family doctor. I encounter this almost every day I'm in the office. And so the new edition begins with a story of something that happened in the office recently. So mom brings her 6-year-old daughter in, and the girl is sick. She's sick. She's got a fever of 102. Mom explains she's got a sore throat, doesn't want to eat anything. She's visibly ill. She's flushed. She's ill. So mom has told me the story. I say, okay, time to take a look. Would you please open your mouth and say, ah? And the daughter shakes her head, no. And I say, okay, mom, looks like I'm going to need your help here. Would you please ask your daughter to open her mouth and say, ah? And mom says, her body, her choice. Okay.
No.
My body, my choice has been a longtime slogan of the abortion rights community. More recently was adopted by activists opposed to COVID vaccines. Mom is using that slogan to defend her daughter's refusal to allow me, the examining physician, to look at her daughter's throat. Now, that's an extreme example of what I mean by the collapse of parenting. That's why I chose to put it in the opening story. And incidentally, the publisher allowed me to read the audiobook. First time ever, they allowed me to read the audiobook. And if you download the free sample, that's the story that we chose to lead with. So that's an extreme example of what I mean by the collapse of parenting. Look, parenting only works if parents have authority to teach the child. Otherwise, it falls apart. And that's an extreme example of what I mean by the collapse of parenting. A parent who has completely abandoned her authority to the detriment of the child. How am I supposed to make a diagnosis if I can't look at the kid's throat? There's a lot of reasons kids have a sore throat and fever. Yeah. But what is much more common is the parent who is unsure of their authority. So another example from my own experience as a family doctor. Kid is not paying attention in school. Off the chart on the Connor scale. So Connor scale is a standard thing that teachers use to determine how inattentive a kid is class. Kid is not paying attention in any class. Parents take the kid, the child psychiatrist says, well, it looks like kid has ADD, prescribes Vyvanse, very popular medication. And Vyvanse is tremendously helpful for this kid. Doing great. But kid is now jittery and has no appetite and has palpitations. So parents saw something I wrote for the New York Times about the dangers of these medications and brings the kid in to me for a second opinion. And I do a careful sleep history, which this particular psychiatrist neglected to do. I asked the kid, do you have a phone in your bedroom? Well, of course. Doesn't everybody? Were you on your phone last night? Well, sure. Of course. Isn't everybody? Well, what were you doing last night? I was scrolling through TikTok. Well, when did you go to bed? Well, like midnight, after midnight. So this girl is getting 6 hours of sleep. She needs 8 or 9. She's sleep deprived night after night. She's not paying attention in class. Sleep deprivation perfectly mimics ADHD. There is no Connor scale or Vanderbilt interview that can distinguish ADHD of the inattentive variety from sleep deprivation. Vyvanse, Adderall, they're tremendously helpful because they're amphetamines, they're speed. They compensate for the sleep deprivation, but the appropriate remedy for sleep deprivation is sleep, not Schedule II amphetamines. So I say to mom, okay, you got to take the phone from your child at 9 o'clock, the latest, so that she can get a good night's sleep. And mom says, oh, I couldn't take her phone. She'd totally freak out. And we're talking about a 12-year-old girl, a 12-year-old girl. That's very common. The first example, the mom who said her body, her choice, that's very unusual. The second example, the mom who says, I can't take the phone from my 12-year-old. Yeah. That's really common. And that's also what I mean by the collapse of parenting. Parents who are unsure of their authority, parents who cannot exercise their authority. And the result is kids who are struggling, kids who aren't getting the sleep they need, kids who are anxious and depressed. And again, a big chunk of the book is showing how so many of these problems that we're seeing right now, kids who are anxious, who are depressed, who are overweight, so many of these problems can be tried directly and clearly to parents' failure to exercise their authority. But the emphasis of the book is on empowering parents to do their job, especially parents of faith, showing how Deuteronomy 6, Proverbs 16, there's so many clear messages of Scripture that this is your job as your parent. If you are a parent of faith, if you are a Jewish or a Christian parent, you are called to do this. And I have a presentation for parents called Evidence-Based Parenting, which could also be called Biblical Parenting, because the evidence, the longitudinal cohort studies show that the authoritative parent, that kid is going to have the best outcomes, but the authoritative parent is also the biblical parent. And what I show in the book is that if you're doing your job as a parent, your kid is going to flourish. But what has happened is the parents are not looking to the research. They don't know it for the most part. And that's again, the mission of the book is to share that research. Instead of looking to the research, they're looking to the New York Times and National Public Radio. And unfortunately, the New York Times and National Public Radio, I cite a column in the New York Times. Jennifer Finney Boylan, a longtime a longtime columnist for the New York Times, wrote a column for the New York Times on enlightened parenting, in which she asserted that the enlightened parenting, according to the Jennifer Finney Boylan, New York Times columnist, enlightened parenting means, and I quote, setting your child free to discover for themselves their own right and wrong. And if in so doing your child becomes a stranger to you, then so be it.
Wow. Hey, it's Andrew Klavan with this week's interview with Tom Fitton. Tom is the president of the government watchdog group Judicial Watch, and he has done a spectacular job hectoring the government to get information out of them. I don't know anybody else who does it better, really, just kind of prying their secrets out of them by legal means. It's been quite amazing. And he's written a new book about some of the stuff he's found, some of the alarming stuff he's found. It's called Rights and Freedoms in Peril, an investigative report on the left's attack on America. Tom, it's good to see you. Thank you for coming on.
Hey, good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So, people may think, gee, now we've won this election, this is not an important thing. But as I'm going through the book, I'm seeing that this is kind of, it's sinister because it's kind of interwoven into secret places where you actually don't see what they're up to. Let me start, first of all, since this is a good week for all of us, I think, let's start, first of all, with your reaction to Trump's reelection and how you think it's going to affect these threats.
Well, I think it's positive news for those of us who support the rule of law generally. There will continue to be challenges. And to the degree the public spoke, they rejected lawfare. They rejected this kind of, I would say, rising communist movement that's hijacked the Democratic Party, where they've decided all the institutions of America can be thrown out. Constitution, sovereignty, the 14th Amendment, the Fourth Amendment too, the First Amendment. And so Americans want America to continue. I mean, that's what the election's about, in my view. And now, does it mean the left is going to give up and all of a sudden start driving within the guardrails of traditional American discourse? I don't think so. But certainly a lot of the tools they've used to abuse Americans will no longer be in their direct control.
Yeah, that is definitely good news. I have to say that, they not only go after the Constitution, they go after the Constitution in the name of the Constitution, which is incredibly sinister, I think. It's just, but it is their kind of method of operation. Before we get into the kind of nitty-gritty of the book, could you talk a little, the two things I've always felt the right lacks is one thing I think we lack cultural weight, entertainment, the entertainment industry and novels and things like that, ways of reaching people through their hearts instead of just their brains. But the other thing has always seemed to me that we do not have a lot of investigative power. We don't have the kind of incredible teams the New York Times can dispatch to any part of the world to get information. Can you talk a little bit? I've always admired you for doing this. Can you talk about a little bit about the methods that you use to pry information out of the government? When you're doing investigation, what are you doing?
Well, the big law that covers or gives us the ability to investigate at least the government is the Freedom of Information Act. And it was passed over the objections of Lyndon Johnson, you can be sure. And the left had traditionally used it to target, anti-communism. They were, or to push anti-communism. And they used it to try to curtail what then was the deep state, from their point of view, efforts to curtail the communist menace and national security threats. And the left traditionally used FOIA, to figure out why the government wasn't spending as much money as it should have and could have to help their allies. And so Judicial Watch started using FOIA 30 years ago to advance, I like to think, conservative values. We recognize when there's big government, there's big corruption. And FOIA is a remarkable statute because it allows you, I'm not a lawyer, but I've learned a lot about it since I've been here at Judicial Watch. You ask the agency for records, the federal agency, and if they don't respond within a certain amount of time in a way that you like, and there's a good reason to sue over, you can go into court. And so we're in court, little old Judicial Watch, and we're a little bit bigger than just little at this point. But the IRS has to show up in court. The Justice Department always has to show up in court. All these agencies have to show up in court and explain to the court and to Judicial Watch and indirectly to the American people why they don't want to turn over documents, or when they will, or why they're withholding specific pieces of information. And that's just something that's not widely available in the rest of the world, if at all. So it's really a remarkable tool for those of us who want to exercise our First Amendment rights, because it is a core First Amendment right, petitioning the government, right? Find out what the government's up to. And the left has been furious about it, especially since others started following our lead. Congress's investigations have gotten a little bit better because they were jealous and upset, not jealous, but upset that Judicial Watch was getting documents they couldn't. Some of my colleagues in the conservative movement started using it more directly. And the left really got mad when parents started using FOIA at the school board level and demanding information about what the schools and the school districts were doing in terms of teaching their children. So it's an effective tool, and it's always going to be a close-run thing, because I recognize in no other country could we be able to do what we're doing as Judicial Watch here.
You know, one of the frustrating things about fighting with the media, basically the left-wing media, is you're constantly being accused of being a conspiracy theorist on the right. And the joke nowadays is the difference between a conspiracy theory and a fact is about 6 weeks. And it does seem true that more and more conspiracy theories turn out to be just basically what's happening. You, in this book, Rights and Freedoms in Peril, you look at the border, for instance. Now, there are lots of theories about the border. Why on earth they opened the borders to all of these people? Are they trying to destroy us? Are they trying to bring in voters? You had a wonderful phrase for it, planned chaos, which I thought was a very good description of it. What are they up to? Why on earth have they opened our borders?
You know, if you take my theory of the case, right, that these actions are designed to destabilize the country. So when we see and get upset about what happened on the border in terms of the chaos, in terms of the resulting and foreseeable consequences related to crime, public expense, health, safety, welfare, you name it, our political system, all of those are features. They're not symptoms. For the left perspective, that's exactly right. I mean, how many times have we complained about the most extreme outcome that the left wants to promote? Now, the political people will always push back from it and say, well, that's too far. But the radicals, they don't care about it at all. They think, yeah, that's exactly what we want. We don't believe in American exceptionalism. We don't believe in the idea of American citizenship. And so when you say conspiracy theory, they agree with us on what their agenda is. It's the politicians who have to be educated about what the issue is.
So when people are complaining, oh, you know, they're trying to replace us, you're trying to destabilize the country, the far left is like, yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah. What are you complaining about? Of course, you know, and we laugh at some of it, and it's effective to laugh at your opposition at times. They're not laughing. It's not a joke to them. It's, you know, no Marxist can be, you know, there's no level of absurdity or pettiness that a Marxist won't embrace. I mean, just look at the so-called replacement theory. I mean, I always say, you know, the conspiracy theories that are kind of out there. First of all, I believe everything initially, and then try to figure out what's actually true. But often, what is true is worse than a conspiracy theory that's out there. So we have 10 million, 15 million non-citizens who have entered the United States illegally. And their mere presence, it's like a black hole, right? And it's going to twist our body politic and distort it, because if they're here for the next census, in the least, that means that states where there are large numbers of them will get to keep or increase congressional seats that will almost always benefit the left-leaning states. Maybe Florida and Texas might benefit a little bit because they have large numbers there. But we're talking 20, 25, 26 seats, if you go by the numbers from the last census, that the left will be able to retain or obtain as a result of this presence of these aliens. So they don't have to be all illegally voting. They just have to stay here.
Have you found documents that reveal motivation?
No, it's usually the process, and this is what we want to do. Sometimes there's an acknowledgement of the consequences of the process, but it's usually someone complaining and who's quickly overridden by their superiors. And Lord forbid you're on the wrong side of those discussions in government. That's why we have whistleblower laws and such. But the motivations are quite public. I mean, this is why they hate the internet and want to control it, because the motivations out there for anyone with 3 minutes on their hands and a competent understanding of search functions.
For more great content, like and subscribe. And for even more great content, subscribe to The Andrew Klavan Show wherever you get your podcasts.